I bought the land almost 15 years ago. A quiet stretch of property just outside town, 30 acres of open ground, thick trees, and a small creek running through the back. For years, it sat untouched, waiting for the right moment. I had no big plans back then. Maybe a retirement home, maybe a small getaway cabin, or maybe something for my kids in the future. But the land was mine, legally bought, fully paid for, and properly registered. I visited it once or twice a year just to walk through it, breathe the fresh air, and imagine what it could eventually become. Never in a million years did I expect to return one afternoon and discover that it had become something else entirely, a full-blown construction zone with dozens of half-built houses. The day it happened, I remember turning off the county road and driving toward my property, only to see something strange, a line of cement trucks rumbling past me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Development around the area had been growing, but when I reached my own land, I froze. The entrance was no longer the grassy opening I used to walk through. Instead, there was a massive sign planted in the ground, "Future Home of Greenwood Estates, a proud HOA community." My first reaction was confusion. Wrong location? Maybe they put the sign up by mistake. But the more I looked around, the more the confusion turned into disbelief. Heavy machinery was everywhere, bulldozers flattening the earth, workers hammering frames, concrete slabs already drying in the sun. Streets had been carved through the land, power lines were being installed, and almost 30 houses were already halfway done. Men in vests walked around with blueprints, directing subcontractors, checking measurements, and behaving like everything belonged to them. I stepped out of my truck and approached the nearest worker, asking who was in charge. He barely looked up and pointed me toward a white trailer at the edge of the site. Inside, I found a man in a polo shirt with Greenwood Development Director embroidered on it. His desk was cluttered with maps and permits. When I introduced myself and explained that the land he was building on belonged to me, the man laughed as if I had told him the world's funniest joke. "No, sir," he said casually, flipping through some papers. "This subdivision belongs to Greenwood Homes. We bought it last year." My stomach dropped. Bought it? That was impossible. I had never sold it. No one had ever contacted me. No notice, no offer, nothing. I told him the deed was literally in my home safe. He shrugged, clearly not taking me seriously. He pushed a stack of documents across the table: development plans, construction permits, zoning approvals, everything stamped and processed by the county. "Look," he said, "if you have concerns, talk to the HOA board. We're just building what we were contracted to build." I left the office in a daze, my mind racing. How could this happen? How could anyone think they owned land that was legally mine? It felt like stepping into some alternate reality where everyone else was convinced of a truth I knew was a lie. I called the county office immediately and demanded answers. They told me that according to their records, the land had been transferred 2 years earlier. Transferred. Not sold by me. Not signed by me. It didn't make sense. When I asked for the transfer documents, they sent me a scanned copy. My jaw clenched as soon as I saw it. My name was on it, but not in my handwriting. The signature looked like mine, but only at a quick glance. It was a forgery. Sloppy, too. Something a trained examiner would laugh at. Someone had forged my signature, someone had filed fraudulent paperwork, and someone had convinced the county to approve a massive development on land that didn't belong to them. Most people would have stormed back to the construction site, waving proof and demanding everything stop. But I didn't. Something inside me told me to hold back. If they were willing to commit fraud on this level, if they were arrogant enough to build a whole neighborhood without the real owner knowing, then they were already in deeper trouble than they realized. I walked back to my truck and watched the workers for a long moment. They hammered, poured, drilled, and lifted without any idea of how badly their employers had screwed up. I realized then that the developers and the HOA were so confident, so sure of their fake paperwork, that they never expected to be caught. And that gave me an idea. A dangerous one. A powerful one. If they wanted to build on my land, I would let them. I wouldn't warn them. I wouldn't file complaints yet. I wouldn't call the press or police. I would simply wait, quietly, patiently, while they invested millions into homes built on land they did not own. And when the time was right, when the project was complete and every dime was spent, I would show them the real deed, the one with my name, my real signature, and the truth they thought would never surface. That day, standing in the dust and noise of unauthorized construction, I realized something very important. They thought they were stealing from me, but they were actually building their own downfall. As the weeks passed, the construction site transformed at an unbelievable pace. What had once been untouched woodland was now a grid of developing streets, rows of identical house frames, and dozens of workers moving like a well-rehearsed machine. Every time I drove by, it looked more like a neighborhood and less like the land I had cherished for years. The developers didn't know that the rightful owner, the person whose signature they had dared to forge, was watching their every move with a growing mix of anger and calculation. I kept my distance, choosing observation over confrontation. And that's when the Homeowners Association finally entered the picture. Their presence was impossible to miss. Polished SUVs rolling onto the property, clipboard-carrying board members, stepping out with the kind of confidence only people used to absolute control could display. They walked around the construction site as if they were royalty, pointing at houses, directing developers, and discussing future community guidelines like they were planning a kingdom. I stayed in my truck at first, listening from a distance. But curiosity got the better of me, and one day I approached them calmly. I introduced myself politely and asked why they were developing an HOA community on land that legally belonged to me. The reaction was fascinating. The woman in sharply dressed, overly confident HOA president gave me a cold, dismissive look, the kind meant to put someone in their place. "This is Greenwood Estates property," she said firmly. "We have full oversight of all construction here. If you have complaints, you can submit them in writing once you become a resident if you meet our membership requirements." That last line made my eyebrows lift. I wasn't just being dismissed, I was being talked down to. It was as if she thought I was some random passerby complaining about noise. I corrected her immediately. "No, you don't understand. This is my land. I own this entire area. I have the deed at home." The board members exchanged looks, amused, almost pitying. The HOA president crossed her arms, smirked, and said words I will never forget. "No, this entire neighborhood is ours now. It was purchased legally and transferred legally. You don't own anything here anymore." Her tone wasn't just confident, it was absolute. The kind of certainty that comes from people who think they're untouchable. I pulled out a printed copy of my original deed, something I had started carrying with me just in case, and held it out for her to see. She didn't even touch it. She barely looked. "Old paperwork?" she said dismissively. "Probably outdated. County records show we own everything from the West Road to the tree line. So unless you're planning to buy a home here, you're trespassing." Trespassing? On my own property? That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a mistake, or incompetence, or sloppy clerical work. It was deliberate. And the HOA wasn't a victim of the forged paperwork, they were accomplices. They didn't care about the truth. They cared about power, about control, about building a gated community they could rule from their boardrooms. The arrogance was overwhelming. One board member, an older man with overly gelled hair, even stepped forward and threatened to call security if I didn't leave immediately. I could have exploded. I could have shouted, demanded, threatened, called the cops, but something stopped me. Their confidence was so high, their belief in the forged documents so absolute, that any immediate fight would be pointless. They were convinced they owned what was mine. And people like that need to learn their lessons in the hardest way possible. So I simply smiled, nodded slowly, and stepped back. "I understand," I said calmly, though inside, fury burned hot. "I'll handle this the right way." They assumed that meant I was giving up, that I had accepted their fraudulent claim, that I was intimidated by their clipboards and fake authority. In their minds, the HOA was the law, and they had just declared themselves rulers of my land. Over the next few weeks, they doubled down. Signs went up declaring private property, HOA members only. They assigned guards to patrol the nearly finished streets. They even placed warning notices on my truck the few times I parked nearby. Every bit of their behavior told me they believed they were invincible. They didn't know I was preparing every moment of this document, collecting evidence, assembling every proof of ownership, gathering signatures, dates, property lines, county heirs, and the forged transfer file. They didn't know I had hired a property attorney who nearly fell out of his chair laughing at the stupidity and illegality of what they had done. They didn't know the county clerk who processed the forged papers had resigned quietly after being confronted with the truth. And they certainly didn't know that every smug word, every arrogant claim, every threat they made, was actually strengthening my case. The HOA thought they had seized a gold mine. They thought they were expanding their empire. They thought they had complete control. But what they had really done was commit fraud on a scale so massive that when the time came when we finally walked into court, they wouldn't just lose the neighborhood they claimed was theirs. They would lose everything. And I was already imagining the moment their faces would change from arrogance to shock. They weren't just stealing land. They were building 96 homes on a lawsuit that would bury them. And they had no idea. The moment I realized the HOA and the developers were fully convinced they owned my land, a strange sense of calm washed over me. Not the calm of surrender, but the calm of strategy. Their arrogance had blinded them so completely that they didn't see the trap they were building for themselves. If I had confronted them aggressively, they would have paused construction, lawyered up, and scrambled to cover their tracks. But by staying silent, by appearing powerless, I allowed them to continue walking toward the cliff they had built with their own hands. So, I made a decision that most people would consider insane. I would let them finish the entire neighborhood, all 96 homes, before revealing the truth. At first it wasn't easy. Every time I drove by and saw the frames rising higher, the roofs going on, the streets being paved, a part of me burned. This was my land, my property, being carved apart like a cake at someone else's party. But another part of me saw the bigger picture. Every nail they hammered, every pipe they installed, every dollar they poured into construction was making my future court case stronger. The more they built, the more they invested, the more wrong they would be when the truth came out. They thought they were gaining a subdivision. In reality, they were building an expensive monument to their own ignorance. As the months rolled by, Greenwood Estates started to look less like a construction site and more like a finished neighborhood. Houses stood tall, some painted, some with for sale signs already planted in the fresh lawns. The HOA began preparing documents for future residents. They outlined rules about mailbox height, lawn colors, fence permissions, and noise restrictions. They even planned a gated entrance with a giant stone sign declaring the community's name. I remember driving by one evening and seeing the HOA president standing proudly near the entrance, showing a young couple around like she was the queen of the land. She spoke with confidence about property values, exclusive membership, and strict community standards. Little did she know, she was giving a sales pitch on a property she had zero legal authority over, and I wasn't the only one noticing. Developers celebrated milestones, sending updates to investors. They boasted about being ahead of schedule, claiming they had secured every legal requirement. Their delusion was almost impressive, but I stayed quiet. My attorney and I met regularly, collecting every shred of evidence we could. He advised me to keep recording, keep saving copies of everything, and stay patient. The more they build, he said, the bigger the check they'll have to retort, the more they'll lose when the judge hands everything to you. Meanwhile, the county officials tried to avoid the mess. They didn't want to admit they had approved fraudulent transfer papers. They didn't want to accept blame. They avoided my calls at first. But when my attorney presented the original documents, my deed, my dated tax payments, my notarized signatures, the county realized this wasn't going away. We'll review it, they said nervously. We have procedures. Procedures. As if procedures could erase the fact that 96 homes had been illegally built on land that still legally belonged to me. Yet still, I did nothing publicly. No lawsuits filed yet. No warnings given. Not even a letter to the HOA. I wanted them to dig as deep as possible before I struck. The real entertainment came when the houses neared completion. Buyers began touring the properties. People walked around admiring the fresh paint, the modern kitchens, the open floor plans. They dreamed of raising families here, never knowing their future home was sitting on land obtained through fraud. I felt bad for the buyers. Truly, they were innocent. That's why I didn't let my anger spill onto them. My fight wasn't with the future residents. It was with the HOA and the corrupt developers who had orchestrated this entire mess. By now, the HOA had become even more controlling. They tried to tow my truck once when I parked on the public road near the site. They sent me a written warning, threatening fines, even though I wasn't part of their so-called community. The president even confronted me again, telling me that the land no longer concerned me. Her confidence was astonishing. It was almost a shame how shattered she would be later. But again, I smiled, nodded, and walked away. Behind the scenes, my patience was paying off. My attorney found the forged signature expert who confirmed without doubt that the transfer documents were fraudulent. We located the notary who supposedly validated the transfer. He admitted he had never met me and that his stamp had been stolen. Even some county workers began whispering privately that they knew someone had been bribed to push the development through quickly. Every piece of evidence was lining up perfectly. And still, I waited. Then finally, the day came when the last house was completed. 96 fully built homes stood proudly across the land. Streets paved, lights installed, sidewalks poured, landscaping finished. And the cherry on top, the HOA held a small ribbon-cutting ceremony. They took photos, smiled, and congratulated themselves on their achievement. I watched from a distance, quiet and patient, because in my hand that day tucked neatly inside a folder was the original deed, the real deed, the one that would change everything. And the moment I would walk into court was approaching. They thought they owned a neighborhood. They had no idea they were about to lose it all. By the time construction wrapped up and all 96 homes were standing proudly across my land, everything inside me felt like a coiled spring ready to snap. I had spent months being silent, watching the HOA parade around with imaginary authority, watching developers celebrate their successful project, and watching county officials scramble behind the scenes as they slowly realized the disaster they'd approved. But the moment had finally arrived, the day we were going to court. No more pretending, no more walking away politely, no more hiding the truth. Today was the day the entire fraudulent machine they had built would collapse. The courthouse was buzzing when I arrived. The HOA board was there in full force, dressed sharply, whispering among themselves with smug confidence. The HOA president, the same woman who had dismissed me repeatedly and called me a trespasser on my own property, walked around like she owned the entire building. Developers were also present, suits, ties, and forced smiles. But beneath their confidence, their eyes flickered with unease. They sensed something was wrong, though they couldn't quite place it. Their attorney, a tall man who looked like he thrived on intimidation, strutted around like he had already won the case. He saw me and approached with a smirk. "Hope you're ready to face reality today," he said with a tone soaked in arrogance. "This land belongs to my clients, and we'll make sure the court understands that." I simply nodded. "I'm counting on it," I replied calmly. The courtroom doors opened, and we all filed inside. The judge, an older man with sharp eyes and a reputation for being no-nonsense, stepped in and ordered everyone to be seated. The case was announced. Greenwood Estates Homeowners Association and Greenwood Development versus alleged trespasser and former owner. Former owner. My attorney leaned over and whispered, "They're about to learn the truth the hard way." The HOA's attorney began first, speaking with confidence, presenting evidence that the land was legally theirs. He referenced the fraudulent transfer documents, tried to paint me as a disgruntled previous owner who refused to accept the sale, and even accused me of harassment. The HOA president nodded proudly through the entire performance, certain the judge would rule in their favor. When their side finished, they looked triumphantly at the courtroom, like actors taking a bow after a flawless performance. Then, it was our turn. My attorney stood slowly, the picture of calm professionalism. "Your Honor," he began, "we agree that the transfer paperwork exists, but what my client disputes is its authenticity. And today, we will prove that the HOA and developers have built an entire neighborhood on land that was never legally sold." That statement caused a wave of murmurs to ripple through the courtroom. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Proceed," he said. My attorney walked to the evidence table and carefully placed a folder down. "Your Honor, this is the original deed to the property signed, notarized, and fully registered 15 years ago. My client has paid taxes on this land every year since. He never sold it, he never transferred it, and he never authorized anyone else to do so." The judge reached for the folder. The moment his eyes scanned the document, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The HOA attorney's smirk faltered. The HOA president sat straighter, her confident posture cracking. The developers exchanged nervous whispers. But my attorney wasn't finished. "Now," he continued, "compare my client's verified signature to the signature on the so-called transfer documents." He handed the judge another set of papers, the fraudulent ones. The judge studied them for a long moment, then looked up sharply. "These signatures don't match." The HOA attorney jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, with respect, sit down," the judge snapped. "We are far from finished here." My attorney brought forward an expert handwriting analyst, who confirmed under oath that the signature on the transfer document was poorly forged. At that, then came the notary testimony. The notary, who had allegedly validated the transfer, admitted he had never met me, never signed off on any sale, and had reported his stamp stolen months before the document appeared. At this point, the HOA president's face was drained of color. Developers looked like they might faint. Even their attorney had lost all swagger, flipping through paperwork desperately as if the truth might magically rearrange itself. But the final blow was yet to come. My attorney presented records from the county office, showing irregularities, rushed approvals, and unexplained signatures. Some officials were now under investigation. Some had already resigned quietly. What had once appeared like a smooth, legal transfer now looked like a web of fraud, bribery, and incompetence. When my attorney finally finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge leaned back, took a deep breath, and then looked directly at the HOA, the developers, and their legal team. "You built 96 homes," he said slowly, "on land that never belonged to you. The rightful owner is standing right here." The HOA president gasped softly, finally understanding the magnitude of what they had done. "Your Honor," she whispered. "There must be some way to silence," the judge said sharply. "This is one of the worst property violations I have ever seen." Then he delivered the final verdict. All 96 homes, and all developed land, legally belonged to the original owner, not the HOA, not the developers, not the investors. Me. The courtroom exploded. Gasps. Shouts. The HOA attorney tried to protest. The developers looked ready to collapse. And the HOA president sank into her chair, staring blankly ahead as the truth settled on her like a crushing weight. The deed in my hands wasn't just a document. It was their downfall. I had waited, I had watched, and now, justice had arrived. The shockwave from the judge's ruling didn't stop in the courtroom, it spread outward like an explosion, rocking the HOA board, the developers, the investors, and even the county officials who had tried so desperately to hide their involvement. The moment the judge declared all 96 homes legally mine, you could almost feel the world tilt for everyone on the opposing side. Their empire, their investment, their arrogance, everything crumbled in a single moment. But for me, the aftermath wasn't just satisfying, it was eye-opening. As soon as the hearing ended, the courtroom dissolved into chaos. HOA board members argued among themselves, pointing fingers in every direction but their own. Some blamed the developers, accusing them of hiding the truth. Others blamed the county, insisting they had been misled. A few even tried to approach me, suddenly polite, suddenly humble, asking if there was any way to work something out. I walked right past them. They hadn't cared about fairness or truth when they were kicking me off my own land. They only cared now because the consequences had arrived. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Apparently word of the case had already started to spread. Cameras flashed as they swarmed around me, asking questions about how I felt, what I planned to do with the nearly completed neighborhood, and what my next move would be. I answered politely, but vaguely. I wasn't interested in turning this into a media circus. There was still a lot to do. The real chaos happened back at Greenwood Estates. When the news reached the construction site, workers began packing up equipment. Some homeowners-to-be who had already signed pre-purchase contracts or paid deposits showed up demanding answers. They were innocent players in this mess, but they quickly learned the hard truth. The HOA had built their dream homes on land they never owned. Many cried, some shouted, some threatened lawsuits, and to be honest, I couldn't blame them. If I were in their place, I'd feel betrayed too. Meanwhile, the HOA headquarters, a rented office decorated with future community maps, turned into a battlefield. Board members were quitting left and right. 2 members tried to quietly resign before legal notices could reach them, but it was too late. Their signatures were on too many fraudulent approvals. There was no escaping accountability. Within a week, the HOA president, the woman who had talked down to me, threatened me, mocked me, was removed from her position. She didn't step down gracefully. According to county staff, she showed up yelling, throwing papers, accusing everyone else of ruining her reputation. Her arrogance had been replaced with desperation. She went from ruling a neighborhood to being investigated for fraud. The developers fared no better. Their investors bailed immediately. Millions of dollars evaporated. Lawsuits from angry buyers began piling up. Their entire company was suddenly in danger of collapsing. In private, I heard through my attorney that the CEO was furious not because of the fraud committed, but because they had gotten caught. Their greed had blinded them. They saw my land as a gold mine, and they never thought someone like me would fight back. The county wasn't spared either. The internal investigation uncovered a long list of irregularities, missing files, suspicious approvals, rushed stamps, and even an employee who had accepted gifts from the developers. 2 county workers lost their jobs. One was facing criminal charges. Another quietly retired before things escalated further. Through all of this, I kept my distance. My attorney and I handled everything slowly, methodically. I didn't need revenge. I already had justice, and my land was legally restored to me completely. But people kept asking the same question. What was I going to do with 96 newly built homes? It wasn't a simple decision. Part of me wanted to tear everything down just to make a point, but that was anger talking. And anger wasn't going to pay property taxes or insurance for nearly 100 houses. Another part of me wanted to sell everything at auction, just to watch the HOA's masterpiece get bought piece by people outside their control. But what I really wanted was peace. After weeks of thinking, I came up with a plan that surprised everyone. I opened negotiations not with the HOA, but directly with the future homeowners. Those who were innocent, those who had already invested time, money, and hopes into these houses. I didn't hold them responsible for what the HOA had done. So instead of turning them away, I offered them a chance to buy the homes from me directly at fair prices. No HOA, no ridiculous rules, no power-hungry board. Just simple ownership, with freedom to live as they pleased. Buyers were shocked. Some cried with relief, others hugged me. A few said they felt safer buying from me than from the HOA. The backlash from the HOA was unforgettable. They tried everything. They threatened lawsuits, which immediately failed. They tried to rebuild their board. They even claimed that selling the homes without HOA approval was illegal. The judge shut that down immediately. The HOA was officially dissolved within months. That neighborhood, once meant to be the center of their power, became the symbol of their downfall. And as for me, I drove through the finished streets one evening, the sun setting behind the rows of new houses. Children were playing outside. Families were moving in. People waved as I passed by. It didn't feel like stolen property anymore. It felt like justice fulfilled. I never wanted to be a hero. I only wanted what was rightfully mine. But in the papping of end, their biggest mistake became the biggest victory of my life. They tried to take everything. Instead, they built everything for me and lost it all.